So I guess war fucking changes. You know, Fallout used to be great. It used to be the best game that you could get your hands on. Fallout New Vegas, arguably the greatest piece of media I've ever encountered because it treats the the entire piece, the entire everything about it with institutional realism, and everything Bethesda has done to it just strips away all of its structural gravity. Fallout, as written by the legendary Chris Avellone, does not derive its power from retro-futurist aesthetic, mutated creatures, or recognizable iconography like vault suits, power armor, Nuka-Cola, the Brotherhood of Steel. It's it doesn't matter. None of the aesthetics matter. It is all background noise as its distinctiveness lies elsewhere. At its strongest, Fallout is a simulation of institutional formation under scarcity. It is a world where ideology is not a decoration. The 87 tribes that were conquered by Caesar in order to help tame the violence of the East is not derived from idiots in football pads who are illiterate. It is derived from genius frumentari, battle technicians, intelligence agencies, people like Woolpace in Colta, people like Lucius, people like Ulysses, all of these things, planting a mole in their enemies' camps, all of these things. Violence is not meant to be a spectacle, but it's policy. It's the borders of these different factions exist because supply lines exist where factions aren't just identities, but they're structural machines. And when that structural realism is weakened, Fallout doesn't just lose its tone, it loses its dimensional depth. And unless you've actually engaged with the depth of Fallout New Vegas, you have absolutely no idea what makes it so great. Fallout New Vegas is the highest resolution version of Fallout. The institutions are engineered responses to material pressure. Scarcity generates incentive. Incentive produces structure. Structure then produces a doctrine. And the doctrine produces identity. And then that identity feeds back into the structure. You are introduced by geography constraints that you run into Cazadors and Deathclaws if you head north. So you head south, and then one by one you're introduced to the Powder Gangers and the NCR and the Legion. Each player on that route across the game in these differing ideologies. Now, looking at the Legion in New Vegas, it's easy at low resolution in the show to think that they're just raiders with a theme of looking like Romans in football pads because Aesthetically, they resemble stylized brutality, but at structural resolution, they're something completely different that the show misses wildly. The Legion is an engineered political technology. It's an attempt to solve fragmentation through disciplined coercion. It transforms tribal chaos of the East from Mexico through Arizona through like Utah and tries to condense the violence through creating a myth of Caesar as a governance tool, and it replaces the fluid identity of each of these individual tribes with total incorporation and amalgamation. Its violence is not impulsive and just random, it's administrative. And what makes the Legion so disturbing is not that it's just a bunch of savages, it's that it's rational. It is organized violence with a theory of order, and it works. The horror is systemic violence. And when such an institution is portrayed as impulsive, barbaric, berserk, erratic, the core mechanism is completely deleted. You've completely appropriated and really misappropriated their entire culture. The Legion ceases to be a state forming apparatus and it becomes instead a silhouette of brutality. Its internal logic completely vanishes, its incentive structure disappears, its disciplined coercion collapses into chaos, and at that point, the Legion is no longer a machine. It's just Macaulay Culkin dressing up, doing a Roman cosplay in what should be Fallout when it isn't. It's just Fallout themed. And Fallout has never been able to sustain itself on costumes. Fallout functions best when the world is constraining the plot through structural realism, right? Settlements exist because food and water exist. Borders exist because there's logistics involved. There's security systems. There's fragile legitimacy because governance is costly. The NCR has high taxes. Factions have to behave consistently because incentives constrain them, and the plot emerges from these constraints. Now, when the plot warps the world, when characters start teleporting to one another without supply lines, when security systems fail for no reason, when threats are just appearing and disappearing for dramatic convenience, the world stops feeling like a lived ecology. It begins to resemble a set of rooms through which the writers of the show are just guiding you. And Fallout's uniqueness lies in the opposite dynamic that the world is a pressure system. Every choice carries a material cost, not just a moral one. Every institution is an answer to that cost. The wasteland is not random, it's recursive, it's a feedback and feed forward. Everything you do matters. And this is what creates the franchise's center of gravity. Now, I mean, like, you look at my favorite character in the entire series, Ulysses. Now, if you're an idiot, you just think, oh, bear, bull, he's annoying. I don't like him. The man's first language is not English because he is a survivor of a genocide and he is critiquing really the exact same thing that so many people have a problem with the Fallout show. He's saying it's not about the bear, it's not about the bull, it's not about the NCR, it's not about the Legion, it's not about the Enclave, it's not about Vault-Tec, it's not about the Brotherhood of Steel. All of these flags are just symbols of systems. Ulysses is so often misunderstood as an abstract or overly poetic or wordy character, but that is his structural purpose. He's not moving the plot, he's exposing the very pattern that makes the TV show not Fallout, and it's just Fallout themed. And it just sucks because through Ulysses, the player is confronted with the idea that symbols become nations, that flags and routes and names acquire mass, that history is not a memory, but it is a weapon, that ideology is not just a preference or an aesthetic, but it is a sedimented survival strategy. The NCR and the Legion are not good and evil, they're competing logics of continuity, attempting to convert chaos into a way of life that can be survived. And Ulysses frames the wasteland with that recursive logic. He insists that patterns repeat because the incentives repeat. He demonstrates that nations are not born from heroism or myth, but from actual logistics that are hardened into myth. And in this sense, he's diagnosing the exact problem with the Fallout show. He reveals whether the writers themselves understand the franchise's structural core or not. If the world is written as a sequence of references and set pieces, then Ulysses can't function. His resolution requires institutional realism, and without it, his insights float free of the scaffolding. And Fallout's most delicate achievement is its uneasy intimacy between myth and material. House seems to be prophetic. Caesar invokes Rome. NCR invokes democracy and the continuity of the old world. And the Brotherhood tries to have sacred stewardship of technology in order to protect the planet. The Enclave claims to be the last remnants of the old world government. But myth in Fallout is not a metaphysical destiny, it's a strategic insulation which is layered over material constraint. House's omniscience must be grounded in machinery. The strip security needs to be grounded in maintenance and resource allocation. The Legion's submission must buy something tangible in a world where safety is so rare. NCR taxation needs to fund something visible yet fragile. And without the machinery, a house just knowing what is going to happen makes Fallout fantasy. Without logistics, the order is just a wave of a hand. And without cost, after 15 years of whatever happened in the Mojave, legitimacy is just assumed. And when the material disappears, the only thing left is the myth of all of these factions. Fallout drifts towards just a theme park simulation. The props are recognizable and the references land, but there's nothing that's earned. It's just back in Nuka World where they're all just raiders wearing different costumes. And it's important to distinguish between incompetence and thesis shift. Now, high resolution institutional drama is cognitively and materially expensive. The TV show would unfold slowly, demand your attention to incentive chains, consequence accumulation, and it resists clean antagonism. Intelligent television, serialized television, really is aimed at broad audiences, optimizing for clarity, emotional arcs, and visual recognition. So they're going to compress that down instead to lessen institutional logic for aesthetic shorthand. And the compression isn't necessarily malicious, it's structural. But when compression reduces institutions to costumes, the world's dimensional depth contracts. And the tension shifts from how does this system sustain coherence under pressure to who wins the confrontation. And that is not trivial. That redefines the entire franchise's center of gravity. When institutions are treated like machines, horror is rational. Trade offs are visible. Governance is expensive. Ideology is revealed as adaptive strategy. The wasteland judges factions by one metric: can you sustain coherence? When institutions are treated like costumes, violence and horror are just theatrical. The trade offs fade away. Governance is just implied rather than modeled. Ideology is just an aesthetic marker. The first model produces recursive tension. It's real. The second produces episodic tension. Fallout's deepest trick has always been its recursive awareness. It shows how civilizations attempt to become gods inside a ruined system, and then subjects them to material constraint. And it demonstrates that myth without logistics collapses, and logistics without legitimacy decays. If the structure is not shown through supply, discipline, governance, and consequence propagation, the franchise becomes Fallout themed rather than Fallout structured. So, the relevant question is not whether a particular creative lead is present or absent between Chris Avellone of Fallout 2 and Fallout New Vegas, or Todd Howard of Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and 76. And the question is not whether Chris Avellone understands the franchise more than Todd Howard. The real question is structural. When a setting's identity rests on reactivity and institutional gravity, what narrative mechanisms are required to preserve that depth across mediums and production scales? Can structural realism survive the compression of the show? Can consequence accumulation survive episodic pacing? Can rational horror survive aesthetic flattening? And these are the design questions that, if Fallout wants to get back to what makes the show great, it will continue to address. So, in conclusion, Fallout is strongest when it models institutions as engineered responses to scarcity, when it shows how ideology crystallizes from material pressure, when it allows consequences to accumulate, when the world is constraining the plot rather than the plot warping around the world. The wasteland is not a backdrop. The wasteland is a pressure system. The wasteland feels alive. It produces factions the way deserts produce mirages, as survival strategies hardened into destiny. And if that pressure system is visible, if those constraints are visible, Fallout maintains its grand center of gravity. If it's reduced to aesthetics and iconography and confrontation, then the recursion and the magic of the IP fades. Without recursion, the wasteland becomes mindless, stops thinking. Who cares? It merely performs, and because of these logistics, supply lines, real constraints, that is why war never changes. Thanks for listening to me. I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel, my video. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you appreciate the depth and nuance of what makes Fallout New Vegas as great of an IP as it is. And if you have any comments, feel free to drop them. I love you all, and take care.